Hello, I'm Margaret Sullivan, and 20 years ago, Dan, my husband, and I lived in Montebello, which is about 5 miles from Goodwin House, and is at the corner of Route 1 and the Beltway. Uh, and the morning of 9/11 was blue. It was one of those wonderful fall days that we get, which is crisp and lovely. And I had been reading the newspaper in bed and drinking some coffee and got up. I can still feel the matting on our balcony porch as I walked across, and I can still smell the coffee that had just been cooked and left. And I went into my own office to talk to our son, who was living with us at the time and an adjunct professor at Lehigh, and was about to go up for the day. And we were making arrangements about my taking him to pick up a rental car at the airport. And all of a sudden, we lived on the 16th floor and we looked straight toward the city. All of a sudden, the building concussed. And I thought, since we were on the top, that one of the compressors on the roof had blown. And then we heard this bang. And then we looked out the window and began to see this black smoke. And it took us a few minutes to realize that it wasn't the airport, because we could see a plane landing, and that it had to be the Pentagon. And then, and only then, did we turn on the TV and begin to get a sense of what was happening and see the pictures of the Twin Towers in New York. I took Jerry to the airport to pick up a car and drove back home again. And he was the last one in line just before they stopped giving out rental cars. And so they'd also shut down the airport metro. And so he walked back home from the metro, as did a number of our neighbors who worked at the Pentagon. The next few days were glorious and heart-wrenching because we all had empty, hollow feelings in our stomach. 10 years later, in September of 2011, I remember Americans were, and here I'm going to read from something I wrote then. In mid-September 2011, Americans focused on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. At Ground Zero, the Pentagon, and in a field in Pennsylvania, we paid tribute to those who died that Thursday in 2001. We honored the soldiers and wept for the civilians killed in Iraq and Afghanistan in the decades since. We analyzed the naughty impact that morning that changed history and its aftermath. I found myself also remembering, yet again, as I always will, another world-shattering day, Pearl Harbor. December 7th, 2001 was the 70th anniversary of that date that will live in infamy. 2011. I was 7.5 that boring afternoon, sitting on the floor at my grandmother's feet in the Methodist parsonage in Magnolia, Mississippi. Sunday dinner was over and the dishes washed. The New York Philharmonic played softly on the round-topped wooden radio. Abruptly, an announcer interrupted. In an early morning Hawaii time sneak attack, Japanese planes bombed ships in Pearl Harbor and strafed civilians in Honolulu. Ultimately, we learned that a substantial portion of the U.S. Pacific Fleet was sunk or damaged, and over 3,000 people were killed or wounded. It's a similar number to 9/11. In that moment, we could only listen in stunned, uncertain silence, straining to learn more. That December Sunday in 1941, along with Mummy and my two younger sisters, I became a refugee. Having already left China at war, we were living with my paternal grandparents, feeling like an outsider in a world where I did not yet feel at home. I had been waiting. Pearl Harbor determined for what? We would not go back to Daddy. For years, he would not come home to us. On December 8th, the United States declared war. New places came into our vocabularies and onto school maps. Normandy, the Ardennes, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Hiroshima. We got news from the radio or the paper. The black and white newsreels screened before the Sunday afternoon movies only gave us a glimpse of what was happening. Paper boys ran through the neighborhood hollering, "Extra, extra," for the major events like President Roosevelt's death and VE Day. Bells rang for VJ Day. I had trouble balancing my experience of a real Japanese person, the friendly enemy Japanese soldier in Jinan who liked children, with the ubiquitous propaganda caricatures of buck-teeth, slant-eyed Japs, and I say that feeling uncomfortable just saying it, shown in the support our troops to defeat the enemy posters. As I grew up, I knew friends and colleagues or their parents who had witnessed the rape of Nanking or suffered internment camps in the Philippines and China. Others we met endured the awfulness of the Bataan Death March or had hidden out in the jungle for the duration, moving from place to place to avoid the Japanese soldiers. Making real friends with Japanese people was a slow, difficult process. I had to overcome that other dark shadow of the atrocities of war. Even later, in Northern Virginia, we had a dear California-born Japanese-American neighbor who had spent much of the war in a camp, interned by our own government. We now have neighbors in our home who grew up that way. This is a part of our national life we cannot be proud of. Pearl Harbor was only the beginning of an ongoing lesson on balancing uncomfortable contradictions. As an adult, I lived with and worked in extremely different countries and cultures around the Muslim world. I see two sides of this coin. Close foreign service friends were hostages in Tehran. Having been a part of American embassies, our reaction to the bombing of our embassy in Nairobi by Al-Qaeda and the Egyptian Islamic Jihad was visceral. My experience in post-tsunami Aceh allowed me to witness the resilience and tenacity of survivors grounded in deep Islamic faith. All these experiences led me to appreciate the complexities of judging individuals and groups, to recognize the impossibilities of valid generalizations. I still grapple with the critical distinction between abhorring evil acts and casually lumping together all of a particular group of people as embodying that evil. I am profoundly troubled for my own country when some among us incite hatred against a spectrum of widely differing communities and beliefs as if they were a single nefarious entity. For those of us with an active memory of them, Pearl Harbor and World War II, like 9/11, were the pivotal events that defined us and framed our lives. Collectively and individually, we experienced fear and vulnerability, as well as resolve and shared sacrifice. We knew bravery and loss. I remember, as I always will, that sparkling September 2001 morning, the smell of my cup of freshly brewed coffee, the clear view of Washington from our 16th floor balcony, the concussion that shook the building even before that blast reached us, black smoke suddenly billowing skyward from what turned out to be the Pentagon a few miles north. And when we turned on the TV, we saw the fearful images from Ground Zero. A hollow feeling filled me during the surreal, glorious blue days that followed. As I remember 9/11, I'm carried back to that also never to be forgotten sepia-toned Sunday afternoon in my grandmother's living room. I grieve and I ponder these days that will live in infamy. And as I read today, we have just left Afghanistan after 20 years. And I watched that with mixed feelings because we got so many people out and so many people didn't. And we still don't know what to make of that 20 years and what it meant and what it will mean and who we are and how we think about that. It's time to pause and to decide what we do next and hope we can do it right.